Christianity helped shape the morality of the West. The question is whether those values can survive without Christian belief. The claim: the West cannot preserve Christian morality without Christian belief. Whenever you are ready, Tom, I will start the clock. You just tell me go, and I'll start the clock.
Okay. Go. So just to strongman the opponent's case, I'm just gonna go straight to statistics. There are many countries that were Christians that has accepted the atheistic point of view and even embraced it. One example are the Scandinavian countries, and they seem to be more, have lesser crime rate, more political stability, have better, economic flourishing, and less homicides, less murder, less people seem to be going well in that countries. There are even non-Christian countries such as Japan and Singapore that can we say that has better morality than a Christian nation. And that's not to say as well. Sorry, it also I'm going to include the greed that goes on with the modern Christian right nowadays, the mega churches. Why it seems to be a bit more materialistic when seems to be contradictory to what Jesus has taught. Not to mention about in the past the Crusades and the corruption of the Roman Catholic Church. Why were there killings then when it was instructed not to murder? So all of these things sum up and seem to be the case that Christian morality is not really dependent on the belief. Yeah, finish.
All right. Tony, do you feel like that was a fair representation of your side?
Yeah, I would say fair representation. And just to clarify, when you're talking about there's other societies that have preserved morality without, a Christian belief system necessarily. It's like, so I don't necessarily even have to argue for atheism. I can even argue on behalf of another religious system that's not Christian, is really the claim. And so, yeah, I would say that was well said. Those were the basic, I guess, core points. So sounds pretty good to me.
Cool. All right, let's go to the negative side, Steel Manning the affirmative. Just let me know when you're ready, and I'll hit go. We have 2 minutes.
All right, so go. So Steel Manning the affirmative. All right, so in order for any society to function, you need to have some kind of religion. But I guess within our discussion, we're arguing more so on the side of, a religion that affirms some kind of supernatural beliefs. And so how do you, okay, so like if you try to have like a secularized belief system, then it's not really sufficient to organize people around those principles. Like if you have a secular society, it's more of what people don't believe in and anti-dogma than it is any kind of pro-dogma. And because of the lack of a, pro-dogma, they're not able to, create their own traditions and, incentivize certain really things and organize society to like a sufficient degree. And it's like can get very scattered very easily. Whereas if you have like a unified and coherent religion, it organizes people, you know, I guess pretty well and optimally. And so I feel like kind of like a religious belief system is the optimal with supernatural beliefs is one of the optimal ways to organize a society. without it splintering off into a billion different directions. So I guess that's my time.
All right, Tom, you feel like that was a fair representation of your position?
Yeah, I would believe. I would say so. Yeah. I think the argument is a bit more philosophical and theological, which is quite abstract, which kind of represents that it's not the case that a supernatural cause would be a moral case. Is that what you were trying to
Um,
say?
yeah, so I'm saying that the supernatural beliefs, that, God like exists, and that, the medieval people interpreted that as like literally, that was a really effective tool for, you know,
Mm-hmm.
making people behave in a certain way.
Yeah.
Um, and so I guess that's, that like the claim that this is like literally true, and that is
Okay.
a very effective tool for
Fine.
affecting morality.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, y'all. Got through that section. Let's go into the opening statements. We have 5 minutes each. Let's start with Tom. You just let me know whenever you're ready. Let me fix the clock here.
Yep.
Yep. I'll mute and you just tell me when you're ready.
Whew. Okay. Let's go. Go. Yeah. So I'm gonna start with definition of terms because both three terms are abstract. When you say belief, what do you mean by belief? As Jordan Peterson would say. And I'm gonna put myself in a disadvantage here because it can mean acceptance of belief or it could mean the evidence of action of belief. So I would go with the acceptance of belief, because a lot of Christians, you may argue, do not really necessarily follow the teachings and seem to be more secular than others. But I would still go with the case that is the acceptance of belief. Definition of Christianity, there's a lot of denominations out there, but there is this one thing that we agree on, and that's the resurrection of Christ. So if you self-identify yourself as Christian, almost guaranteed, not almost, but it's almost like that is a core fundamental Christian belief. So I would reduce that Christianity into self identity as a Christian, even though it might be a disadvantage in my case. Thirdly is morality, Christian morality. What do you mean by morality? Love God and love others. That's what Jesus says. That's quite abstract, right? Is LGBT acceptance of LGBT doing is loving, or is it correcting them that is loving? Confliction, right? Is it killing Hitler loving, or is it being compassionate to Hitler loving? Confliction. So I would reduce it to the 10 Commandments, just so we have more clarity and we can deal with the question more. So without further ado, I'm gonna go straight to the statistics. But before I start, no, not yet. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go with the statistics. So Christians, as I said earlier, didn't really do a good job. Let's focus on Latin America, which are 90% are Christians, right? It's the most politically unstable. Economy is a bit collapsed. There's a lot of corruptions in there. Very high crime rate, similar to Philippines. And if you have, comparison to the Western world, a bit more secular, as we say, the Scandinavian countries. The Scandinavian countries are pretty much better than those Christians. And I mentioned about Scandinavia, Singapore, and Japan. But I do want to have a quick grab on a low-hanging fruit. There's one thing that they have missed, though, the Christian morality, and that is loving God above all. Do not put your names God in vain, and attending the Holy Sabbath day. So there's no Christian. It's somewhat, yes, Christian morality, but it's also partial because they don't have that. And also there are lots of factors with those crimes. So imagine a deprived, well-starved lion versus to a well-eaten lion. Obviously, in those Latin Americas, the economic situation is really poor, so you would see a bit more, desperation for living. So there's a lot of factors involved there. It's not really statistic independent on the statistics. So we have to be really careful when judging things. So let's go in comparative study. I think that's way better. A country that was a Christian that went into non-Christian. Germany, West Germans, East Germans. East Germans, 60% weren't Christians. West Germany, 90% Christians. This was during the Berlin Wall, and we can see the difference. However, statistics shows differently, because in statistics, it says that East Germany have lower crime rates, less starvation, less poverty, and more equal. And West Germany is a bit more higher crime rate, more starvation, and the opposite of what I said earlier. But we have to be really careful when we understand these statistics, because West Germany might be a bit more transparent, a bit more have better reporting, a bit more honest, whereas East Germans maybe a bit more better, they have centralized control, so they might be fraudulent that goes in there, and better policing might be. So we can't really rely on those statistics. Just to give an example of a socialist woman in America who was so fan of the Russian Soviets that she created a havoc in New York. She actually went to Russia, and she was distraught on what she saw, because it was the opposite of what she believed. And her name is Emma Goldman. You can search it up. And ever since what she saw there, she went back and contradicting to what she said in the very beginning. So what I'm trying to say here is what statistics tell us doesn't instantly guarantee that that's reality. Let's go to America, a bit more specified. Liberal states, a bit more atheistic, versus the conservative states. It seems to be the crime rate is the same. New York and California have higher crime rates. Mississippi and Alabama have higher crime rates. So it seems to be that the statistics a bit more, it's not really significant, which side we did on. However, I'm gonna mention again the command.
Finish up your final thoughts whenever you get a second. Yeah, the timer's up. Yeah, just go ahead and
Oh,
finish. You can
is it
finish
up?
this. Yeah, you can finish up these thoughts, and then let's flip sides. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I'm gonna get. So how many minutes do I have left? Sorry.
5 minutes is up. Yeah.
Oh, 5 minutes. Oh, sorry.
It's okay. You can finish your last final argument if you like, and then we
Okay.
can flip sides.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't time myself. Okay. I'm just gonna, there's as I mentioned about this, there's no statistical difference in there. I'm gonna mention what seems. There's only one thing that is different, and this is what Augustine has mentioned. Christians see the world through the eyes of faith. Christians see the world through the eyes of faith. And that's the belief that we are in the image of God and we follow Christ. And we may think that's very superficial, but the result of that is like, for example, euthanasia, which is quite evident within a secular atheistic world. It's not about just progressing and alleviating suffering. We see psychology, we see the community, we see the value of human life aside from suffering. And in abortion as well, it's not just about freedom of a woman. It's about baby in the image of God. It's about the corruption of oneself. It's about the responsibility that a person should have and the ordering of life. So these are what we see in the lens of faith. Another Augustine Agia, and then this is going to be my final point, is there's, although a bit tangent but similar, is the idea of suicide. Because if we count sins, would it not be more reasonable to kill yourself, commit suicide? One sin prevent further sins, right? But Augustine thought something different. If you commit suicide, you're gonna stop, future good things that might occur to you. Good things that you may be able to share to others. And this is the difference, because it is through faith that Jordan Peterson, is able to stand up against the Canadian government despite the threats and has given an amazing education. It is through faith that Augustinians, Franciscan, and Lasallian education, Oxford, Cambridge, and Harvard, did their best in order to spread education throughout, enlighten the world. It is through faith, the freedom of slavery. It is through faith, the freedom from the crown. It is through faith from the states. And that is one thing that is missing in the atheist world. And it's the first commandment, which is love God. And if God speaks to a Christian, that Christian takes it seriously because of faith. So
Okay, Ben. Yeah, I think we're going to cut it off right there.
yeah, that's fine.
So let's go over to Tony. You can have, I'll give you 3 extra minutes. You have 8 total minutes. You don't have to use them all. Just let me know, Tony, whenever you are ready, sir.
All right. Ready. Okay. And so I'll just be arguing the case. Okay, so normally I'd be probably taking the other side of this argument, but as we're in Peterson Academy, that's pretty popular, and so it went by quick, and so I'm here arguing the negative, but still forced me to think in some different ways and see the question a little bit differently. So it'll be interesting, and it's even in my interest for Tom to rebut my responses, effectively and truthfully, and we'll be interested to see what he has to say. So, all right, so yes, it's important to define the question. So the prompt is, can the West preserve Christian morality without Christian belief? Or the West cannot preserve Christian morality without Christian belief, right? And so then how do we define Christian morality? How do we define belief? And how do we define preserve, right? And depending on how you define them, it depends on what you're arguing for and against, because different definitions have completely changed the meaning of the prompt. And so I like how you said we can define the Christian belief as the 10 Commandments. That's a good, pretty good heuristic. Yeah, and I guess I'll just leave that at that, because that answers that part. Basically sums up what I was going to say about that, but gives me a little bit of advantage, I guess, because I was going to argue something more limited. But okay, so then how do we define Christian morality? Well, yeah. Okay, so I guess how do we argue what do we mean by preserve? Because it's like, if we mean preserve in the next, 5 to 10 to 20, or any preserve for the next 50 to 100 years, for example, right? Can the West preserve Christian morality over the next 10 to 20 years, or 50 to 100 years, without, Christian belief? And then Christian belief meaning the 10. Oh, wait a minute, actually. This is my bad. Okay, so I misunderstood. Okay, so let me go back to Christian belief. So this is the way that I'm defining Christian belief, because for me, if we define Christian belief to mean, or belief itself to mean acting as if something is true, or acting in accordance with a certain thing, if we define it to mean it that way, and we define morality to mean behavior, then the prompt becomes, can Christian behavior, or can the West cannot preserve Christian behavior without without people acting in accordance with as if Christianity is true. And so if people are acting as if Christianity is true, then by definition they're having Christian behavior. And so what I'm instead taking belief to mean in this case is belief in is faith in the core beliefs of Christianity. And so that'd be like believing there's one God, believing in the Trinity, believing that Jesus, rose from the dead. And then as well, right. And then morality would be more so the 10 Commandments kind of stuff, like the behaviors associated with believing in the Christian stuff, believing within the whatever the dogma. And it doesn't even have to be necessarily literal belief to those religious beliefs, but it has to be faith in those religious belief and their truth claims, whether that's you're believing that they're metaphorically true, like more Petersonian, or whether you're believing in they're literally true, like a fundamentalist. Okay, and then so now if we're going to preserve, well, if we're saying the next 50 to 100 years, well, that's really, we don't know what that's going to look like. That could be, a whole different world with AI and this and that. And by that point, society is going to be unrecognizable. Humans are going to be unrecognizable. Christianity itself is going to be unrecognizable. And so if we, argue on that point, it becomes more so a question on AI and whatever than really the core of the debate. So by preserve, I'm going to mean, um, can the West preserve Christian morality, meaning through sufficient societal pressures? Like if there's a lot of economic pressure, if there's a lot of ideological pressure, if there's a lot of technological pressure, can Christian morality survive on those in those senses against those threats, as long as it has Christian belief, you know. And then Christian morality is actually what I would say is closer to the Ten Commandments side of things, is the behavior kind of things, right? And so basically, I'm saying, can we have basically the Ten Commandments kind of behavior in a society, and can we withstand that as a society against those threats without, faith, whether that be literal or metaphorical, in the, uh, core beliefs of Christianity, right? And so I'm saying that no, we do not necessarily need those core beliefs in Christian theology in order to preserve the morality in face of the threats to it, right? Okay, and so I mean, I guess for an example, I mean, we're not supposed to do rebuttals, I get, but just to argue on behalf of that, if we're arguing Ten Commandments is the morality side of this, and if we can preserve that morality side, well, already we have, the Jewish tradition, and that preserves the Ten Commandments far better than, the Christian system does, you could argue. But the Christian system kind of argues something higher, I would say. But if we're just basing it off the Ten Commandments and basic morality, you can already say that the Jewish tradition and their religious system preserves that better than a Christian system does. You could say that a Buddhist system or Shinto system, or look at Japan, for example. Japan's not really a Christian, not really very, I mean, sure, they're influenced by the West to some degree, but they kind of emerged out of their own tradition and religion. And yet, if you look at their society and you look at the fruits of their society, they have a lot of the, they're following a lot of the Ten Commandments, and if you're going by the Peterson definition of Christian, right, and this would pertain more to morality, where it's like, oh, Dawkins is a Christian because being a Christian is being like, like a family category where you're, you have maybe 9 out of 11 of the shared beliefs or whatever, or shared actions. And just to wrap this up, right, and so by that definition, it's like, well, if you look at the fruits of a Japanese society or Buddhist society, they have maybe 8/10 or 9/10 of the, beliefs or behaviors associated with Christianity, and therefore the morality is preserved without the beliefs, the explicit Christian beliefs. And so that's essentially my point.
Now that we've completed the opening statements, y'all, let's go into the rebuttals. You have 3 minutes each. So we'll start with the affirmative. I'll raise my hand whenever there's 10 seconds left. Just let me know whenever you're ready. Tom.
How many? So how many minutes? Sorry, 1 minute. Did you say?
You
for
have,
each battles.
for the rebuttal section, you have 3 minutes each.
3 minutes each. Fine.
Yep. And I mean, feel free to have a timer on the side for yourself too, if you like. But I'll still raise my hand.
Okay.
Just, let me know whenever you're ready, man.
Okay. Cool. Let's go. So the first case that you made is about technological pressure, and it might be an argument for my case, if I'm honest, because there are some technological pressures, such as, let's say, you don't even have to go to AI, let's say condoms, um, birth control pills. And now the latest one is PrEP, which is the anti-HIV. So that is a more reasonable way in order to prevent STIs. But if you go to the conservative view, it's still not to have sex, right? That is still the main morality. So if you have these innovations, you would end up with a society that would commit adultery. So I think it's even more better, to have that morality, a Christian belief of the Ten Commandments as, as a foundation for it. And it's quite evident as well if you compare the liberal state versus conservative states. Let's say conservatives are a bit more open-minded. They are, most of them are in an open relationship with someone. I mean, that's not to say that Christians are not in an open relationship, but you see this less often in the conservatives. And the second one that I want to mention is, I think it's a really good one, is how about the Jewish tradition? Because they seem to have preserved the laws better than Christians. But I do want to make an emphasis on the difference between a Christian. Although we have faith, we have a man that died in the cross. That is, different. So the suffering of Christ is much more empirical, is historical, and we can confirm that. Whereas Jewish, they have the laws of the prophets, but they don't have that backing evidence, historical, that's, that there was actually a man. If an atheist would try to explore it, it is historical proven that Jesus actually existed. So whatever, if you go with, if this guy is a lunatic, I forgot the Christian argument for this one, but yeah, it's, if he actually did exist, then you would then question whether what he said is true. And additionally, the Christians were different from the Jewish tradition, because Christians were not trained with the scribes, and this is from the Wesley Huff's case, that they propagated the scripture, and there's over evidence, not even evidence, over evidence of the New Testament, which means to say that Christians not really focus on the law, but they focus on spreading the message to everyone. So if you have different translations, people say that's not really good. But for Christians, they believe it's good because we want to spread the information to everyone. Whereas Jewish are a bit more, no, we don't want to corrupt the scriptures. So I think that is the difference between the Christian and Jewish tradition. Okay, Thomas, that's it. Sorry.
All right, man. Thanks, Thomas, for showing up. Have a good one. And well done on the rebuttal part. Now let's move over to Tony. Let me reset the clock. Just let me know whenever you're ready. I'll mute.
All right, I'm ready. Okay, so rebuttals. Well, to the tech thing and to, okay, so we have condoms now, we have porn now, so we're less likely to commit adultery. And then if we're going to the Ten Commandments, then, maybe sure you have a technical, Jewish win right there, but and you've subverted the law. But I guess Christianity is a little bit more on the spirit of the law. And, Christ says that if you, commit adultery in your heart, then, you basically commit adultery. If you hate your brother, then, whatever, that is drawing the equivalence. And so, okay, we're watching porn and we're, having condoms. And so we don't have maybe a wife earlier than we should and a baby earlier than we should. And maybe we don't, are not as physically promiscuous with other humans, but we are far more promiscuous, than we otherwise would be in a time without that technology. So, the thing is that with technology, right, every new piece of technology has within it embedded and implicit story, right? And so Peterson kind of talks about this, that, with the vehicle, with the car and stuff, it has all of these undertones of like individualism and freedom and this and that, and how a society like Soviet Russia never could have come up with that on their own, but by importing such a technology to their country, and therefore all of the associated infrastructure involved with that and the transformations of cities involved with that, it slowly erodes the Soviet story, and slowly puts in the seeds for a different individualistic story. And so when we have technology that plays on human drives and incentivizes human drives and incentivizes and makes it easier for humans to act in a certain way, makes it easier for humans to sin, right? So like with porn, I would argue that really it's making people less Christian, not more Christian, right? And we're and I feel like it's good standing to say that, so what's more Christian? Is it more Christian to what is it? Yeah, have a wife early and then be promiscuous and cheat on your wife? Or is it more Christian to just have a ton of porn? And it's like, I mean maybe the porn is a little bit less a little bit more Christian, but then again, if you put it on an actual societal scale and what these technologies produce and the fruits of these technologies, right, then maybe if you say 100 people out of all right, time's up, but just to finish the point, let's say if you have 100 people and then you have the old without technology, maybe 5 of those people commit adultery. But with the new technology, maybe 95 of those people are on porn, but none of them, commit adultery. But then again, how many of them are actually getting married now? And so I would lean towards the side that the technology, yeah, makes a person less Christian and doesn't really help in that regard. So yeah, that's the point. Rebuttal.
I heard. Good stuff. Now we're going to go into that 10-minute open discussion where y'all have free reign to just talk about whatever you like. Y'all just let me know when to start. I will mute, and whenever I hear y'all begin, I'll just start the timer. And I'll raise my hand at 30 seconds this time. Does that sound all right?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Sounds good. 10 minutes.
Yep, y'all have 10 minutes to just openly talk about the topic.
Mm-hmm.
All right, here we go.
Yeah, so yeah, we can start. Yeah, it's just, yeah, so I would probably have not dealt with your question properly, and sorry for that. But I think what I'm trying to say is, regardless of the technological pressure that we're facing, the Christian's prescription is still the same: not to have sex, and sorry, not to engage with those. I'm trying to like compare an atheistic without faith versus to someone with faith, right? Because we don't tick boxes like morality. We see and reflect on those things. That's why there's a lot of monks that completely disengage themselves to the society because of this technological pressure. So it's not really dependent on the technological pressure, it's actually independent of it. So what the person does to it, it doesn't guarantee that it would definitely, people would be engaging more with with pornography, with the stuff that you mentioned a while ago. And you would see this in the communities, in Christian communities, that we teach the same lesson. So that's what I'm trying to lean, the line of reason and what I was trying to say a while ago.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. But I guess to get back to the claim, right? Right. So I guess the way that I formulated the question, and then maybe you formulated it a little bit differently, right? So basically, I'm arguing that the faith in the literal or metaphorical truth of the core aspects of Christianity, that is what is defined as Christian belief. And so that is unnecessary to produce the Christian morality, the Ten Commandments, sort of actions on a society-wide scale. And so I just would
Yeah.
like to hear you talk a bit more on why the beliefs are necessary to produce that basic level morality in a way that sustains against technology and ideological or economic pressures. So why are
Mhm.
the beliefs necessary?
So because I didn't have time a while ago, I was discussing about Augustine. Um, so Augustine noticed that there's no difference between a Christian and a Roman person. They seem to have equal outcome of sins. They seem to be causing same amount of sins. But there's only one thing that is different, even suffering, like suffering, although this is more in suffering, not really necessarily paid, but I'm going, like, I'm trying to connect the two. But there's only difference, and that is faith. Christians see it through the eyes of faith. Let me give an example, because you mentioned about technological pressures. If you're not a Christian, you would go through reasons. You would see birth control pill, condoms, and what are the others? Euthanasia. You would see that, and you would go by records. You would go by tick boxes. Whereas Christians see it through the eyes of faith. They see it through, even though it's a commandment, they see it through, Jesus would want me to do this, rather than going through reason. And I know that is a danger, um, and I'm arguing against me. That is a danger for dogmatism. Um, but that is something that is independent, or something exclusive to Christianity. So Augustine was trying to say that yes, we have equal um, bearings as the Romans. However, faith is not about counting your sins, because faith produces wonders. And this is his argument with the suicide. Would it not make sense to commit suicide and have one more to sin, and then remove the others, prevent the others? He's saying no, because even if you include the others, you're going to remove the good things that might occur in the future, such as freedom of slavery, such as freedom from the crown, and educating the world. So that is the difference. And that is the first commandment, which is putting God above all and putting that faith from God. And that is non-existent to any other secular societies. And that is we trust into. So it's not necessarily that we are very moral compared to others. And it's not about the numbers. It's about we have faith that something will happen, good things from the future. And that morality of trusting God is by far, I mean, you have Islam and Judaism, but that's a different topic that we can discuss in the future. But that's what I'm arguing for. Does that make sense a bit more?
Um, so you're defining belief as in the faith in God that produces wonders like abolition of slavery, like people standing up for so so
Just a little clarity. Sorry,
yeah.
it's not about ticking boxes. It's not about counting numbers. I'm saying that that's how we see morality, is through the eyes of faith. It's not about the great things that we have done. So because of that faith, we are reflecting more compared to non-faith.
um right. Well, because the thing is you know the first commandment, I am the Lord your God, don't worship any god before me, put me on the highest place. That might not be explicitly in other religious systems, but you can see it kind of pretty clearly in other religions. Like, I mean, like you said, is Islam, it's like they believe Allah is the highest God, and they do everything based off of that. Or maybe, Judaism, that's, the God is still in the highest place. The commandments are the same. Of course, the structure of the faith is different, and you can say that the Christian story kind of calls people to, to sacrifice, to adventure, to to be the explorer archetype or whatever, and that's a more fruitful, archetype than in a way of being or personality than any of the personalities associated with the other gods or the other traditions. And sure, you can make that case, but really the argument here is, can Christian morality be preserved? And then I guess it depends on how you define Christian morality. And you're saying that it's not defined as checking these boxes, but it's defined instead as something higher. Another thing is how do we define Christian belief? Going back to that is like, well, we're defining it as the core beliefs of Christianity, because it's like, there could be a person that's, a communist, but they're also, a Christian, or they're a populist, but they're also a Christian, right? Or maybe they're in the mega church and they consider themselves a Christian. And it's like, well, at what point are you a Christian, and at what point are you a populist or a communist? Because you can only serve one master. And also like this, it's like the God that Peterson believes is like a very sophisticated version, and you could say like a higher resolution version. And then maybe somebody who goes to church is just a much lower resolution version of the same God, but just, they're on the same spectrum. But then there's like a point where, well, maybe you're on the lower point of the Christian spectrum, but then you're on a higher point on a political spectrum, and you're really worshiping, a different God. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that there are other traditions that elevate their God to the highest place, and they still produce a morality that, that produces a moral society, just by looking at it and you're using your intuition, if that's more what you like Japan, for example. And they preserve it across time, they preserve it across technology, and other kind of pressures, at least so far. And they don't even believe in the Christian story and the core Christian beliefs. So I guess that's kind of my rebuttal to that.
Yeah. So I just wanted some clarity as well regarding morality. So morality is defined as an ought to do. So, and the question is, can the West preserve Christian morality with Christian belief? So if you say Christian morality, you would also include the 10 Commandments. So you include the love God above all, and don't put God in vain, and then remember the Holy Sabbath day. That in itself is not evident to those the 8 secular societies. Although you did mention about Jewish and Islam, but then if you follow Islam, you would go with the Islam morality. It's not really Christian morality, and if you go to Jewish morality, you would go with the Jewish morality, right? So I just want a little bit of clarity there. But although it's a really important thing to discuss, but that would be the effects of those morality. Are they better than Christian morality? Which is a different question, which we can dive into if you want.
Right. So I guess a quick response just to end this off, since I guess we're out of our time of 10 minutes. But yeah, so then it really depends on how you define Christian morality. And Christian morality would be, to me, is, Christian behavior. And then we are kind of in our opening statements, from what I heard you say, correct me if I'm wrong, you were kind of talking a little more about like the 10 Commandments. That's kind of the behavior that we're looking for. And this is the other part is that sure, there's not, worship all gods before me. But it's like, what do we mean by God? Then it goes into another argument. What do you mean by put God in the highest place? If we're meaning put, God the Father, which is, tradition usually, in those sacred like stories, well then put those sacred stories in the highest place. Don't have any other sacred stories before me. You could still argue the same thing with Japan, that they keep those stories in place, that even under economic pressure, they still maintain their your strict policy with only accepting like Japanese citizens and being very strict on that, even though it would help them economically. And so for me, a more appropriate definition of the morality thing is not, do they adhere to every single one of these 10 Commandments, but more or less, do they have, 9/10 or 7/10 of this morality? And that's the basic Christian morality, because not all Christians are going to observe every single one of those commandments, but if they observe enough of those commandments and observe, enough of those beliefs, then they're considered a Christian. And so if you're not following one of the commandments, then you're not automatically not following Christian morality. And, so that's basically what I would say, is that it doesn't disqualify you just by missing one or two or three of the commandments.
Do I have time to rebuttal that? Um,
Sure, let's
yeah.
do it, man.
So yeah. So you mentioned about Japanese, and I think there's many factors on why they have better crime rates. One of them is they are quite a homogeneous society compared to the West. So there's a factor there that must involve. So which do you think is better? A incorporation, including everyone, as in the Muslims, the Black people, and other cultures around the world. Although it's a bit more higher crime rate compared to Japanese, which has lower crime rate. So you're looking at one aspect instead of looking at the forest. So again, that's a different topic, because that would be the effects of those moralities. And I would love to live in a quiet and peaceful place, but also at the same time, is it the highest possible value that we could ever think of? And most innovation, you may argue, comes from the West. So it's not exclusive to all Christians, but I said a while ago, if God has spoken to a Christian, those Christians who actually follow the faith, and you mentioned about the higher God and the lower God, but those, there are varieties of it. But if a Christian hears the call of God, they not most, but some of them will do a spectacular innovation, goodness throughout the world. So it's really difficult to define goodness out of just a crime rate, out of just collaboration in the community. So yeah.
Okay. So I actually have one really good rebuttal if I can make it quickly.
Let's
Okay.
get it.
So so we're talking about innovation and the fruits, and can another culture or religion produce those fruits more effectively than Christianity or people in the West or the US? And to that would be interesting because, right? Because it's like, okay, so we have, say we go to, I don't know, maybe like California during the 1950s or something, Silicon Valley. We have that culture. We have that entrepreneurial culture, the entrepreneurial spirit. We have all of those people, right? And then maybe we take 100 of those people, right?
Mhm.
And they're maybe the most entrepreneurial people. And then you go to maybe Christian Europe, and you go to maybe Norway or whatever, and you say, oh, look at these people. They're going to church. They're observing all of the commandments. They're doing everything according to what the church is saying. They're doing all these Christian beliefs. But then you fast forward maybe 10 years, 20 years. Well, what are the fruits? What are the fruits of those Nordic countries that, did all the right things according to Christianity? They went to church. They went every Sunday. They observed the commandments. And then what about this entrepreneurial culture? And then they produce all of these fruits. They produce wealth, and they make life easier. They reduce suffering, all of these different things. And it's like, okay, well, that system of values seems to have better innovation, better fruits. And, maybe they might be an offshoot of Christian, thinking, and they might have some kind of roots related, but it would be more accurate to say that they're an offshoot of, some Christian ideas rather than they are a Christian, rather than saying that entrepreneurialism is a Christian, ideology, right? And so here we have one case where we have a clearly Christian religion and ideology in Norway, and then we have a clearly entrepreneurial, less religious, less clearly Christian religion, in the 1950s in California and Silicon Valley, and yet they produce better fruits. And you could argue that they're worshiping God in a higher way, even though they have departed more from the Christian belief.
Yeah. So do I have time? Okay.
Let's end it there.
Yeah.
Let's end it there, y'all. You did great.
All right.
Let's go into the Q&A. I'll give y'all 2 minutes to respond. I have 3 questions, and then I'll open the floor to Elevator if she'd like to. Is Elevator still here?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will you be serving face today?
I can be. Okay, give me a second.
It's up to you. So, Yeah, I'll do my 3 questions. You have 2 minutes each. And then, yeah, we'll see if Elevator has anything for y'all. So
Sounds
my
good.
first question is for Tom. It is, why are you not convinced? It is not a matter of time that Christian belief will sputter out, but we will keep the good moral values that Christian belief have emerged. So there's a lot of examples, and I guess a very simple mechanism is, Christmas. Maybe there's less of the Christian belief in Christmas now, but we still exchange gifts. And so there's some nice moral principles of exchanging gifts and celebrating each other for a moment. But we might have less of the belief behind that. So why are you convinced that, you know, it's not just a matter of time that that's just going to fade away as we've seen belief slowly trickle away from these kind of customs?
Let's go.
All right, starting timer.
Okay. A really good question. And however, it is empirically in the liberal cities. It might not slightly a bit, slowly eroding because now we have introduction of Ramadan. And whenever there's Christmas, there are more people now are not celebrating because there's more incorporation of other cultures in there. But despite that, secular cities still celebrate Christmas. You may argue that. However, that's a different case for morality. Although we, we see, first of all, it's not Christmas is not necessarily mean it is a Christian thing, but it is historically because of the giving and birth, because of the birth of Christ that they started giving gifts. So it's not a mandatory thing for people to be giving gifts to everyone. That's kind of like a nicety that we do. It's more about the celebration of Christ. So I don't see anything. I mean, it's just nice to receive gifts, but it's not. It's a different question of morality. So it's not. It wouldn't harm people if you don't give gifts. It's just a nice thing. So that's the best thing I've got. Sorry.
Gotcha, man. Oh, it's fine. All right. Now we turn to Tony. My question for you is kind of similar. It's, how do you know Christian morality isn't like this fire and continuing for a time because of this Christian foundation, these coals that are burning, but eventually fading as this foundation disappears? So if you take the coals away, or the fuel or whatever it is, how do you know that that relationship between the Christian belief and the Christian morality aren't feeding each other and then, replicating?
All right. And what is it, 2 or 3 minutes? Or
Yes, sir. Just let me know when you're ready.
wait, which one, 2 or 3 or
2. Sorry, 2.
2? Okay. All right. I'm ready. So I guess like the cut flour analogy or argument, and how do I know that it's not like a cut flour? And I would say, well, with, of course, you cut the flour and then it survives for a little while in like a little vase, but then eventually it's going to die, right? How do I know that that's not the case? And I mean, I would say that from my position, I don't really even have to argue that that's not the case, because flours, can be, you know, uh, it's not necessary that you have to put them in a vase. You can graft them onto another flower, and then that flower can take the roots of the other flower's system, and then it can survive, just normally as it would with another flower. So you don't necessarily have to sever it and put it in a vase. And so I would also say that when we have, when Peterson talks about the religion across time, and he talks about Marduk and stuff like that, then it's usually like he describes it. There's, different tribes, they come together and they try to make peace, but their gods are conflicting. And so they have some kind of like dramatization, and they have a battle of the gods, and they kind of create a new formulation of the new god, and then that's Marduk or whatever, and then they have a more integrated version, a more accurate and truthful version that's reflective of the transcendent morality, but it's a departure from what the previous god was. And so it's not necessarily the case that we have to abandon tradition, but we need to we need to transform it into something that's new. And once it becomes new enough, then it's no longer recognizable as the old form of Christianity. Or, I guess if you take a different society, then there are other versions. So I don't necessarily even have to argue for secularism. I could just point to a different religious system and say, okay, what about the different flower? They seem to work just fine. I don't have to cut it off.
Cool. I like that. That was clever. The question for both of you, we'll start with Tom, is what assumption are you making that your opponent does not agree with? So it's kind of like, what do you think the first principle or axiom is that you're standing on that the other person isn't on the same page with? So like an example would be if two people are approaching a bridge and one person is fine walking across it because they just know building codes and they're like, well, someone built this bridge, so it's obviously safe because it met codes, so it's built. And another person is like, well, I'm going to step on it and see if it's fine. So they have two different kind of beliefs. Like one has to test it, and then one is just like, I trust it. So what first principle do you think you're operating on that maybe your opponent isn't agreeing with?
I don't necessarily think he's disagreeing on it, but I think he's kind of missing the point of what faith is. He's arguing from the point of view of the effects of those morality, but I'm arguing for the examination and the grounding of those morality, because secular would view things as through reason, through empathy, and through human flourishing, whereas a Christian would be grounding it from the nature of God and the dignity of humanity, that we are created in God's image, and it might be the outcomes are the same, but if the question is about sustaining Christian morality, then I think if you have a better ground and a better foundation, then that is a bit more, maintained compared to growing the reason. And I mentioned about euthanasia, for example, wherein it kind of makes sense to kind of end person's life if it alleviates suffering. But for Christians, we would say no to that. So I think it's not about the effects of it, but I think it's about the grounding. Did I answer the question well?
I think so. I'm trying to figure out how to put it back to you. It sounded like you're saying your first principle that you're operating on is that God is the way that you should be. That's how I kind of interpreted that.
It's more on Christians go with their foundation or their examination goes through the lens of faith to God.
Okay.
And yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. Same question to you, Tony. What assumptions are you making that your opponent does not agree with? You're looking for, what do you think your first principle is?
All right. And is there like a 1 or 2 minute thing on this, or?
Yes.
2? 1?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. And so the question is, what is the thing that what is the axiom that they have that I'm not believing, that I have that they don't believe?
What is the assumption that you are making that your opponent does not agree with? So what do you think your first principle is that you're working with? The thing that, starts folding back on itself because we can't go any further.
All right. So I'll start my 2 minutes.
Sir.
Right. Well, I feel like I'm gonna try to go more on what we seem hung up on. Okay. And okay, well, maybe not. Okay, so what first principle is he? Okay. Am I making that he doesn't agree with? Well, I mean, I just feel like it's kind of how we're defining our terms and how we're defining what the argument is. Because if we're okay, so sure, the entrepreneurial thing could maybe produce better fruits in the short term, but wouldn't necessarily produce those fruits in the long term. And that seems to be a little bit what he was saying. Tom was saying a little bit earlier. And so, well, if we're defining Christian morality as producing the maximal, number of, fruits, according to the Christian story, interpreted through maybe someone like Peterson's perspective, who takes, a different approach than a lot of churches. Well, Peterson would argue that, maybe the entrepreneurs are producing more of that kind of fruit than, an average Christian, or that Sam Harris even is in pursuit of the truth, or that Dawkins is in pursuit of the truth as the highest kind of thing. And it's like, but are those things sustainable across time? And so I guess what I would argue is that sure, these like small instances where people temporarily pursue the create more fruit than maybe an average Christian would, but they wouldn't do it over time, is that, well, maybe we should try to have a different version of Christianity where we're trying to maximize the fruit and not trying to maximize the adherence to the presuppositional beliefs, and that whether or not you're a Christian is more dependent on whether or not you're actually acting in accordance with a certain way, and not whether you're, ascribing to these presuppositional beliefs. And I guess to wrap it up a little bit, I would say that, well, I mean, I guess this is an argument, but I would, for my position, I would say that you can have the fruits without the current core Christian, beliefs, depending on how you define them, I guess. But I guess that's my 2 minutes.
All right, y'all. Let's go to Elevator if she has any questions. Yeah, whenever you're ready.
I have many, but I don't think I'll be able to get through all of them.
Let's try 2, yeah?
Well, we'll see what we end up with. So I joined relatively late into the discussion, so it's possible that this was covered earlier. But it seems like, just as a recap, Tom, your position is broadly that Christianity is true. It's broadly good. And in order to preserve Christian belief, in order to preserve Christian morality, you need to preserve Christian belief. Those are like the top level highlights. And then it sounds like, Tony, you're saying it is possible to preserve Christian morality without Christian belief necessarily. There's sort of a fluidity that you described with how one might define Christian belief. Like, there's going through the motions and being Christian in that sense, and then there's identifying with the Christian label in another sense. So, okay. First, to check my assumptions, did that sound like a roughly accurate portrayal?
Yeah, I guess one thing I would just say is that with regard to Christian belief, in the beginning I defined it as belief with the core beliefs of Christianity, but I did kind of like depart from that a little bit in my earlier stuff, what I was just saying. But originally I defined it as belief in the core supernatural, tenets, like Jesus rose from the dead, God, worship God above all else, the kind of basic, sort of dogma in a way, and the literal, well, whether you have faith in those literally or metaphorically, or that you ascribe to those, and you whatever presuppositionally would be the belief.
So,
but yeah, other than that, yeah.
Just a clarity on my case as well. I'm actually weak in my stance. because I said that good morality is not exclusive to Christianity. And some secular society are much more better than Christians. But that's, the question was about, this is just a bit of clarity, but the rest of what you said is true.
Okay, that's interesting. So this may be personal, but Tom, would you identify yourself as a Christian?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Mhm.
That's interesting. So you draw a line between there's Christian morality, which is, well, how would you define that? Like Christian morality in this sense would probably be what Christians consider to be moral rather than what the Bible considers to be moral. Is that right?
So I didn't want to go to that weed. I
Okay.
actually reduced the term of morality, because Jesus said is love God and love others. So that can mean different things. So LGBT, do you accept them? Is that moral, or do you correct them, which is loving, right? So I actually reduced that to 10 commandments because it's a bit more, straight to the point. And I was trying to say that morality is an ought to do. So just by that definition, Christians kind of maintained the first 3 commandments, which is love God. I mean, not all of them, but it seems to be still the case that people are still loving God, still going to church, not putting God's name in vain, compared to liberal societies wherein they kind of make fun of Jesus. So, but yeah.
So there's an interesting nuance to explore here, I think.
Mm.
It seems like you're saying, okay, there's these 3 core tenets of Christian belief that you would consider to be moral, that you would consider to be Christian. The 3 ones you mentioned, the 10 commandments. And then earlier in the conversation, you also mentioned how you believe that Christian moralities, okay, contrary to like the agnostic view that in order for something to be good, it needs to provide good outcomes. Christianity doesn't necessarily need good to equal good outcomes. Is that?
No, not necessarily. No, I am saying that despite having morality, Christians didn't do well. Is according to statistics, 90% of Latin Americans are Christians, even though it's the most economic unstable, more crime rates, and political, tension and control. So sorry, I missed your question. Sorry, do you mind if you reinstate your question? Is it a
No,
good
that's
the good fruit of the good fruit? Yeah. So I'm trying to say that there is a moral law out there, and Christians aren't doing well. There's no difference between a Christian and a secular person. So it's not the case that there's better morality in Christian versus the non-Christian. But what I'm trying to say was, I mean, first of all, the first 3 commandments, like I said, is much more maintaining a Christian virtue. So it kind of directly answers our premise, which is it kind of sustains more with Christian belief rather than non-sustain. But if we talk about effects, that will be a different question, which I'm happy to do, which I'm happy to explore if you want to explore that part.
Let's relax on Tom if you can, and let's move over to Tony if you have any questions for him. Yeah.
Well, I guess just again similar personal interests. So, Tony, would you consider yourself to be Christian or another belief?
At least Christian aspiring or whatever. I don't know. I don't really, as of right now, I don't go to church regularly, but I don't know. It's like with the Peter, I have my own practices and I consider those legitimate Christian in line with the Christian tradition. And so in some ways, so yes, I would consider myself a Christian, yeah, for basic, yeah.
Okay. And that would be Christian in the sense that you are, you believe in the core supernatural tenets of Christianity, and you are aspiring to,
Right, right. And so core supernatural tenets, literally or metaphorically, is how I define. And so yeah, I'd say probably in between those two. But yes, believe in that sense, yeah.
when you call yourself an aspiring Christian, is there a gap between the degree of belief that you have now and the degree of belief that you're looking to achieve? This is getting like super therapy speak. I'm sorry, but
No, 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 you're good. Well, hmm. Well, it's like, you know, I do some things that probably aren't very Christian, but I feel like at the core I'm trying to be a better Christian, and I feel like that and you know slowly and incrementally over time, and I feel like that's the core kind of thing, you know, in my opinion, is what qualifies is that really I believe that the sacrament of whatever confession is really core to what it means to be a Christian, and so it's like if you're maintaining that, you know, but then that's a departure kind of from a lot of what a lot of other people believe, and so you know it's like really it's kind of different. It's different. It's a different formulation of Christianity, I suppose, that I'm following, right? So I'm not clearly, you know, associated with other traditional institutional versions, but I would say I'm following the spirit of it. I don't know if I kind of went on a tangent, but
no, that adds a lot of clarity. Yeah, I just wanted to get some better context on what
yeah.
was informed both of your opinions, and I think I have it now. All right, Scott.
Right, you know, and I'm not necessarily arguing this because I believe this, but I just want to be part of the debate, and so normally I probably would take the other side, but I'm arguing this side. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something
Nice.
interesting I've been thinking about, but I want to finish the closing statements, and I've been thinking about, I don't know elevator, but which side would you land on this debate? The claim
So
is the West cannot preserve Christian morality without Christian belief. Where would you land?
honestly, this is entirely dependent on what definition we're going
Right.
with, which
Okay.
is like a
Yeah.
Gun to your head.
gun in my head. Definitionally, I guess, yeah, because I would say if you're going to define Christian morality, the most intuitive definition would be morality in line with Christian belief. So, like,
See what
definitionally,
you're
it
saying,
feels
like
like,
the
yeah,
semantics of
you
it.
know what I
I
mean?
got you.
Mhm.
But I
Okay.
don't really have a dog in this fight, so
Okay.
I could go either way.
Cool. Yeah, I had an idea. We can maybe explore it after, but let's go into the closing statements now. We'll start with Tom, and we'll go to
Yep.
Tony. We have 3 minutes each, so this will be your final word. This is what I wanted to say. This is what I thought I covered, and hoobity ha the end. I'll
Right.
fix the clock. 3 minutes. I'll raise my hand at 10 seconds remaining. Just let me know whenever you're ready, sir.
I'm ready. Okay. So history shows and statistics shows that there isn't really much difference between a secular person and a Christian society. Both sides seems to be producing compassion, you know, morality and social order, and even some secular society might be doing better than a Christian society. But the deeper question is, what is the foundation where they get those ideas from? Christians would see it through the eyes of faith, that is grounded in the nature of God and the dignity of human beings. Even though they're falling short, they're trying. As my opponent has mentioned a while ago, he's not sure whether he can define himself as a Christian, but he's trying hard, and that's what I mean by faith. Secular people go with reason, they go with empathy, they go with human flourishing. So euthanasia would be much more empathic, and through reason is better for them, whereas a Christian person is much more deeper. They see things differently. However, Christians didn't do well. We must admit that, and we're trying still. Regarding the definition of Christians, you may go with the Nietzschean definition, wherein there's only one Christian and that Christian died in the cross, or you may just go with, self-identity as a Christian. I think it's like similar to a doctor having a university degree. It doesn't mean that they're automatically be intellectual and automatically competent. There are good doctors and there are bad doctors. Similarly, there are Christians who kind of do things that are not supposed to do, and there are Christians that are doing their best in order to go the best person that they can ever. It seems to be it's a human nature thing that we're talking about, which is a different issue that we can discuss about. But ultimately, having that eyes on, like having the lens of faith is different from having a lens of reason. And as Augustine has said, that is the one thing the only thing probably that a Christian believes so. And I think that is essential to sustaining Christian morality in the States. And like mentioned before, the secular states do not have the three things, which is loving God, going to church, which has some implications throughout the broader society. So that's my line, and thank you.
Dope. All right. Now let's go to Tony for your closing statements. Let me reset the clock. You have 3 minutes. Just let me know when you're ready.
All right, ready? Okay. So I guess another little point is that when we're saying the West the West cannot preserve Christian morality without Christian belief, it's a little bit tricky because we're saying like, can the West preserve it? You're right. And it's like, and then we're kind of attributing Christianity as what has brought the West what it has attained. And well, in part it has. But another part is like, take a lot of other Christian societies, they haven't necessarily produced the same, radically, prosperous fruits as the West has. And part of that is because, the West is not only Christianity, but what is it? They say it's like Jerusalem, Rome, Athens, it's the Greeks, it's the synthesis of all of these different, ideologies, religions. And so, what we're really trying to preserve is the, pursuit of, truth as the highest thing. And, and it's like, do we necessarily need a Christian story in order to do that? Well, we need a religious story in order to do that. Does it have to be Christian? Well, in the West's case, using the foundation of the Christian story is, probably the best bet. I mean, theoretically, yes, you could have a different religion, and the West could survive off of the morality of that while maintaining the quote-unquote Christian morality in adherence to the, 7 out of 10 of the 10 commandments or whatever. But it may be most likely it'll be through the foundation of Christianity that organizes, our religious structure. But it's not just that. It's going to have to be. It's what we're really trying to preserve is not the Christian story itself, but the Christian story understood, with a Western, I guess, perspective. And that's kind of really what matters when it comes to producing these fruits, that Western society has produced. And so, sure, the Christian stories matter, but also they're not fully, effective at preserving what we're actually trying to preserve without all of the other relevant things. If you have Christian stuff within a vacuum, then it's not going to, really work. And so maybe we have the Christian stories as our, foundational story, but over time that's going to transform into something that's, no longer really Christian, just as Christ transformed Judaism into something that was no longer really recognizable as Judaism. And so will we necessarily have to preserve a Christian story? Our story is much different than the one that the medieval people saw and the one much longer from now is going to be much different than the one that we see it as. And so that's my conclusion.
Awesome stuff, y'all. That concludes the debate. Thank you to both sides for a thoughtful exchange, and thank you to everyone listening. Hang out for a minute to see a compilation of previous debates, and make sure to go check them out.
I would say that our political system is what regulates these morals.
But I mean, if everyone's out there with their morals, and if we shared them, well, somebody's gonna break it eventually.
Change. But we do judge cultures as wrong, and that only makes sense if there's a standard above culture.
If we look at everything happening in the universe, it's all either a result of something random or causal, and therefore, it doesn't matter how you kind of look at it and slice it. It is just the same type of things. So
I'm going to say truth has to be objective in order for it to apply to everybody, right?
If you're a Kantian-style deontologist, then it can be a bit contradictory to claim that something is a myth and also helpful.
We actually can make choices that are independent of our determined environment.